The third-gen Toyota 4Runner, a defiant beacon of durability, resilience, and toughness in a city that's chewed up and spit out most of the 4Runner's contemporaries a decade ago. Some of that is due to the self-lubricating chassis system. This one, though, is a little overzealous. Failed inspection due to a leaking power steering rack. So let's get to it. Try to get as much runway as possible and drive it straight onto your lift or your jacking area. And when it's parked, take the key out and lock the steering wheel straight so it doesn't go too cattywampus on you while you wrench on it. Remove both front wheels, 6 21mm nuts each. Remove the skid plate for ease of access. You got 1, 2, 3, and 4 bolts. Those are 12mm. I love these locking organizers. If you like to have a few beers while you work, it'll save you from forgetting what went where or drunkenly kicking it over and spilling everything. You can also come back in the morning and see what order to put things back in, and you'll know if you forgot anything. Removing the sway bar isn't technically necessary, but it makes it easier, and it'll certainly make it easier to film. Each end link has a 14mm nut, washer, and upper bushing to pull off. Now remove the U-bracket retainers. Each side has a 12mm nut and a 12mm bolt accessed from above. It's a New York thing. You wouldn't understand. If you're replacing your outer tie rods too, borrow some of your wife's nail polish, or your husband's, I don't judge, and make match marks on the outer tie rod end. Pull out the cotter pin and bust off the castle nut. We need to pop this ball joint out. You can thread a nut on the end and wail on it with a hammer, or buy/rent one of these awesome ball joint separators. Just slip it on, like this, being careful not to pinch the boot. The manual says you're not supposed to use an impact on these.
Can I get bonus points if I act like I care?
Now take a look up at the steering column. You need to disconnect this rag joint. There's 2 12mm through bolts with 12mm nuts on the other side. Loosen this 12mm pinch bolt so you can slide the shaft up. Turn the wheel if needed, and splay it open like this to help free it up. To unbolt the rack, there's a 21mm, a 19mm nut and bolt on the bushing retainer, and if you give her the old reach around, there's a long 19mm bolt here that threads down from the top. Pry off the bushing retainer, and note the thicker side faces down and the thinner side faces up. Pull off the bushing. Yeah, we can reuse this. Pry the rack away from the subframe as much as you can without it popping off that long bolt in order to gain easier access to the hydraulic lines. Just going to zip tie the other end to the exhaust in case the rack falls. Crack loose the 17mm low and high side fittings. Definitely should use a flare wrench because they're tight as a motherfucker. Get your drain pan ready. If you're swapping your outer tie rod ends to the new rack, you'll need a 27mm for the jam nut. Yeah. And a 28mm to hold onto the tie rod. Just crack it loose. Then you grab the outer tie rod end and you spin and you spin and you spin and you spin and... You spin me right round, baby, right round. I am using new tie rod ends. If we compare them, they're very similar, but look at the threaded ends, they're slightly different. So how are we going to approximate this alignment? I'm going to measure the distance on the old tie rod end from the exact center of the ball joint to the bottom of the jam nut where the nail polish is, 19.2 centimeters. Then thread the nut onto the new tie rod end until it measures the same 19.2 centimeters. If you're in New York, you can also use the rust lines. Thread it in, tighten it up. The new rack doesn't come with a lower rag joint half, so we need to swap this over. Sounds crunch-tastic. Fully remove this 12mm pinch bolt. If I were in California, this might just slide off without massive amounts of persuasion, but... I'm in a New York state of mind. Tappy, 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 tap. Tighten that 12mm pinch bolt to 26 foot-pounds. Insert the new rack onto the long bolt coming through the subframe where that 21mm nut goes. Thread on the fittings, don't cross thread them, and torque to 33 foot-pounds. Click. Remember when you loosened up this pinch bolt? It's so you can slide the upper half of the shaft so you can slip the lower half underneath it. Reinstall the two 12mm nuts and bolts to rejoin the rag joint and tighten to 26 foot-pounds. Retighten the pinch bolt to 26 foot-pounds. Get all the big rack mounting fasteners started and then torque this 21mm to 141 foot-pounds. Then torque this annoying 19mm that comes from above, as well as the bushing retainer's 19mm nut and bolt to 123 foot-pounds. Click. Install the castle nuts on the outer tie rod ends. Mine came with a brand new one, thank fuck. Torque to 67 foot-pounds. Click. Install new cotter pins, also most likely included with new tie rod ends. And if for whatever reason your tie rod ends came without the grease fittings installed, go ahead, screw those in. This one's a 7mm. Next up, you'll be reinstalling the sway bar. If you're trying to reinstall the sway bar single-handed, I recommend hooking one side over the end link and then getting the nut started so you can let it hang. Same thing on the other side. Note that the sway bar retaining brackets are marked right and left. This is the right. The stud goes into the hole and gets nutted. And the bolt comes down through the other side from above. Torque them both to 19 foot-pounds. Reassemble the end link like so. Install the bushing right way up, and then the washer and the nut. Torque it to 14 foot-pounds. Click. I like to lubricate the wheel studs on my rust buckets with a drop of old motor oil. It's got all the vitamins and minerals to keep it from getting seized. A 1E and a 2E and you know what to do. Ugh. I like to run the lug nuts down just one ugga-dugga while it's in the air and then lower it down till the tire kisses pavement. Then torque all 6 in a star pattern to 85 foot-pounds. Now to get the wheels roughly aligned. I'm just going to worry about toe, which is the angle in and out. All I care about right now is that the two front wheels are basically parallel. Normally, I like to measure the distance between the leading edge on the passenger side rim and the leading edge on the driver's side rim. Then remeasure that same distance between the trailing edges on both rims. I adjust toe until the leading and trailing edge distances are identical. That's how you know the wheels are parallel. Unfortunately, the subframe is in the way on this rig, so I'll have to use this ring here on the tires. They're all 4 tires are the same, so this should be okay. You could use 2 yardsticks clamped together, or a tape measure, or a string, or something even better. I'll show you in a sec. As you can see, the driver's side wheel is dead nut straight, but the passenger side is turned in a little bit. So I'm expecting the gap between the trailing edges to be greater than the gap between the leading edges. This Harbor Freight laser distance measurer is super accurate and consistent. I use it all the time around the house, and now I'm going to use it for this. We're going to call it 1.19 meters. So based on how the wheels are pointing, I'm expecting the trailing edges to be greater than 1.19 meters. So my leading edges are 1.19 meters apart, and my trailing edges measured 1.23 meters apart. As expected, there's a difference of 4 centimeters. So if we split the difference and add 2 centimeters to the leading edge distance, this should all work out to 1.21 gigawatts. Start by picking a side and loosening the 27 millimeter jam nut. Back it off plenty so you got lots of room to work. Then run the 28 millimeter inner tie rod end onto the outer tie rod end. This is going to bring your trailing edges closer together, and it's going to push your leading edges further apart. $1.225 meters. Getting there. I started running out of threads on the driver's side, and I didn't want to box the alignment shop into a corner, so I'm moving to the passenger side to finish the toe adjustment. Same concept. Screw the inner tie rod onto the outer tie rod to bring the trailing edges of the tires closer together. Now my leading and trailing edges are both exactly 1.212 meters apart. Now, lock down the jam nuts. Just gotta lower it so my short ass can reach the engine. Now to fill and bleed the system. It should take about a quart of Dexron ATF, a little less. I bought 2 quarts. Bone dry. Fill the reservoir with fluid, and then with the front wheels up in the air, turn the wheels left and right, lock to burp it. Keep going until the bubbles stop and the fluid is at the cold mark on your dipstick. Oop. Alright, why am I trying to film this? Fucking stupid. Now, lower the truck, start the engine, and repeat that previous step to prime the pump. Probably should have shut the engine off for this. That fan is awful close. Alright, hot dog. Alright, so the front wheels are perfectly straight. And yeah, so how do we fix this? Why not just pop the steering wheel off and reinstall it? People get nervous because of the airbag, but it's no big thing. If you disconnect the battery, it's fine. With this method, there's no crawling underneath for trial and error with that greasy rag joint. You can do the entire job without taking your ass out of the seat. Loosen the 10mm, securing the negative battery terminal, and pop it off and tuck it away. There's a cover on either side of the steering wheel. Focus. Just pop it right off, and it reveals 2 T30 Torx screws. Probably not the application for electric power tools. Worth noting that the screws are captured, so they won't fall out on you. There's a double locking connector here. 1 and 2. $19mm for the nut. Leave the nut on a few threads so you don't clobber yourself when you do this. All right, she's free. Don't pull too far because the clock spring wires are still connected, so rotate it straight, slip it back on, and run the nut down 1 ugga-dugga. It's not perfectly straight, but let's go for a test drive in the neighborhood and dial it in. Drive straight down a quiet street. Come to a stop. Zip off the wheel. Clock it straight. And zip the wheel back on. It's not Ferrari perfect, but it's 1997 4Runner perfect. Now, I would just run this nut down a couple ugga-duggas, but for you torque Nazis out there, it's 37 foot-pounds. Take the negative terminal back off the battery to reinstall the airbag. And that's it. Don't forget to reinstall your skid plate, and you probably should get a proper alignment sometime in the near future. Back to New York with this one. Thanks for watching.